Today's daf is daf lamed hey. Vayelchu vayavo, and the word vayelchu in this pasuk, which is relating to the meraglim, is completely superfluous. It could have said vayashuvu mitur haaretz miketz arbaim yom, and omitted the word vayelchu. So if we just would have said vayashuvu vayavo el Moshe, why did it have to say vayelchu? What does this extra word vayelchu teach us? Makish halicha lebia. So it's vayelchu vayavo. And vayelchu refers to the meraglim when they went out on their mission, and vayavo when they returned from their mission. And what's the equation between the two? Ma bia b'eitzara, halicha b'eitzara. So that even when they left on their mission, they were already ready and interested, intending to be motzi laz al haaretz. And even though they were anoshim, ksherim, but nevertheless, when Moshe Rabbeinu appointed them and chose them, they were ksherim. But as soon as they went out on their mission, already at the get-go, from the get-go, they were be'etzara. Vayisapru lo vayomru banu el haaretz asher shlachtanu v'gam zovas cholav udvashu v'zeh pirya uksiv. And in the rest of the pasuk it says efes ki az ha'am, meaning, however, the people that live in the land are very powerful. They live in cities that are walled cities and are very secure. And they are Yelidei Ha'anak. And the Gemara assumes that this laz, that they spoke derogatory words, was sheker. How do we know it was sheker? So the Ein Yaakov says that the sheker was that they said Efes ki az ha'am. And it appears from their words that the nations that occupy the land are not at all in fear of Bnei Yisrael. He azha. And in truth, that's not at all the case, because the umos, the nations that lived in the land, were very much afraid of Klal Yisrael. As we saw in the Shira Sayam, it says, Nomogu kol yoshvei Kna'an. And we had already the Gemara on Daf Lamed Daled that Rachav said to the Shluchei Yoshua, Ki shamanu v'nishma vayomas levavenu v'lo kama od ruchenu. So we see that the meraglim falsified the truth. They fabricated this image as if the people are secure and they have no fear. Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Meir, Kol Lashon Hara, Shein bo dvar emes b'tchilaso ein miskay b'sofo. If I want to convince you of something derogatory, and I want to tell you about something that's false, that it's true, I have to begin at least by telling you something that's true. Otherwise, if from the get-go I falsify the truth, you're not going to believe me at all. And here in the Tchilas Dvarov, they said that this is a land of Zavas Cholav Udvash, so they already had a certain, like, chazaka that they were telling the truth. Now we speak about Kolev. Vayas Kolev es ha'am el Moshe, Omer Rabba, sheisisam bidvarim. The word heisisam here means he quieted them down. He opened his presentation by saying, I'm going to talk to you about Moshe Rabbeinu. They thought that he was going to talk about the negative and be derogatory about Moshe, and they all quieted down. Shepasach Yoshua de Komishtoi the Amrile. The Gemara says that what motivated Kolev to quiet down the people, what he realized is that Yoshua was about to respond to the words of the Meraglim who spoke derogatory about Eretz Yisrael, and Shisku also b'nezifa. They wouldn't let Yoshua speak. They rejected it. The Amrile, and they said to Yoshua, Dein Rosh K'tio Yimalel. It's as if Yoshua has a head that's cut off. What does that mean? He had no sons. And therefore, you know what? Yoshua, what do you care about going into this land? Whether it's a good idea or it's a bad idea, whether it will be successful or not. You have no children to inherit you, although he did have banos. But in any event, they were saying about Yoshua, you have no vested interest here in protecting your children. Lo ichbas lo. In other words, the people were looking for an excuse to reject the words that would be negative against, that would be opposing the words of the Meraglim. And therefore, Kalev, realizing this, Omar, he said to himself, if I'm going to start telling the people about the great beauty of Eretz Yisrael like Yeshua tried to do, they'll find something negative about me, and they're not going to listen to me. So the Ben Yoda asks, what could Bnei Yisrael say that would be derogatory about Kalev? In the case of Yeshua, they said he has no children. And he answers that they could say that, look, he went over to Hebron on his own. He broke away from the Meraglim. Why did he do so? Because he received shochat, some bribery from Bnei Ha'anak, to speak good words about Eretz Yisrael and to convince the people of Israel to believe that they should enter the world. And then these Anokim had the plan that they would destroy Eretz Yisrael. The Amar lehem v'chizo bilvad asal lanu ben Amram. Is this the only thing that Moshe Rabbeinu did on our behalf? And perhaps that's why he calls it Ben Amram, to entice the people to listen to him, that he's talking in a negative way. They wanted to listen to Kalev because they thought he was talking against Moshe. That not only did Moshe want to bring us into this very bad land, and it's a very, very bad enterprise, but he'll tell us other things that are negative about Moshe. Ishtiku. So he caught their attention and they quieted down. Amalahu, but instead, Kalev threw a curveball and he surprised them, and he listed the great things that Moshe Rabbeinu did on behalf of the Jewish people. The Shvach shel Moshe Hotzion of Mitzrayim, Karolonu Sayam, Hechilonu Esaman. There's a whole discussion here about why Kalev only mentioned these three things and not many more things. Im Yomar Asusu Lamos Falulu Rakia Lo Nishmalo. Moshe Rabbeinu has done such great things for us, and he saved us, and he sustained us, that if he would tell us to set up ladders and climb all the way up to the heavens, are we not going to listen to him? Even if he tells us to do something that's absolutely impossible, based on the natural law, we're going to follow his orders. So let's go up to the land and inherit the land. But the rest of the Meraglim, after Kalev gave his harangue, his discourse, they said, no. We cannot defeat the people and conquer the land. Amar Rab Chanina bar Papa Dover Gadol Dibru Meraglim B'Yosa Shah. And what's Dover Gadol? Kalev said that we should rely on the miracles that Moshe Rabbeinu brought about for us. And at that point, the Meraglim had no choice, but they had to respond to Kalev's argument with a Dover Gadol. Ubo Lomar, Shemayo Ilu Gvuras Moshe, V'Nisav, in Balabais Biatzmo, and Yochel Hotzi Kalev Misham. And here they spoke about the Almighty. And what's his Dover Gadol? They said, Ki chazak hu mimenu. The land is even stronger than him. What does that mean? Al tikra mimenu. Don't read it in the plural, el mimeno, in the singular. And it refers, Chas Shalom Ta'Kadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachal afilu HaKadosh Baruch Hu Baal Habayis, who's the real Baal Habayis of the entire world, Eino Yachal Lahotzi Kelev Misham. He can't bring the Umos HaOlam out of the land. They are too powerful even for the Ribono Shalom. And this is a mashal for a Baal Habayis that was Mafkid Kelev Bebeso, and Yachal Otzia Misham. Eretz Ocheles Yoshveh. The Meraglim described the land as consuming and killing its inhabitants because they saw how the Canaanim were burying the dead. Dorash Rova, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani Chishavti L'Tova. I had a good plan for you. Vehem Chashvu L'Ra, but they, the Meraglim, turned it into an evil plan. Ani Chishavti L'Tova, the Kol Heichad Matu Mes Chashiva Didhu. I wanted to distract the people from thinking, oh, look at these people. What are they doing here? They must be spies. And how did I do that, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu? I would bring death upon them. They would be too busy and preoccupied with the burial of their dead. The lowly Shalu Abasrayu, and they won't start investigating who are these people who are traveling around the land. But they, the Meraglim, they decided that this is an Eretz Ocheles Yoshveh, that the land is bringing about their death. And the Yaakov adds, you might say, well, why the Meraglim guilty? I mean, they saw in front of their eyes that people were dying on a regular basis. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu had promised them that he will bring them to an Eretz Tova, and they should have understood that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was killing these local people for their benefit. Ika De'amri, another interpretation of the pasuk Eretz Ocheles Yoshveh, Eov Noch Nafshi. We're going according to one opinion in Baba Basra that Eov lived at the time of Moshe. And Moshe Rabbeinu had said to the Meraglim when he sent them on the mission, they should check out Hayesh Ba Eitz Im Ayin. And that means whether Eov is alive or not. Eov is called an Eitz because in his chus he protected them like a strong tree. And when the Meraglim came to Eretz Yisrael, they saw that Eov at that time died. Vitridu Kuli Alma, the entire world, meaning all of the people that lived in the land, were Tarud Bespeda. And because Eov was such a great man, in many, many different places in the land, they set up Hespedim. And all this HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about so that the schus of Eov would not protect the Yoshvei Haaretz, those who lived in the land. But the Meraglim thought that in each place somebody else died. They didn't realize that all these Hespedim that were going on in different places of the land were all for the same person, Eov, who died. Look how many people are dying here. Wherever we go, the people are dying. So let's analyze this pasuk. Vaniu beinenu kichagavim. Omer Rav Misharshi Amaraglim Shakri Havu. We're going to prove that they were lies. Why? Bishlema, the first part of the pasuk. Vanehi beinenu kichagavim. L'chai. That we can understand. They were in the land of giants. They were small people relative to the giants. And they felt themselves like chagavim, like little creatures, like grasshoppers, relative to these Nephilim. Ella, but afterwards it says, V'chein hayinu be'eineihem, which means that the Nephilim looked at the Meraglim and they saw grasshoppers. Mina v'yadeh. How could the Meraglim possibly know what these giants were thinking about them? And that proves, says Rabbi Misharsha, that they just simply fabricated the truth. Velohi. The Gemara says that's not a proof that they were liars. Why? Because during the period of time that the Meraglim were in the land, the people of the land were avelim. As we said before, they buried their dead, and therefore they were in a state of grief. Apparently, even amongst the non-Jews, there is a custom called Sudas Havra, which means that after you bury the dead, people, friends, or neighbors will serve you a meal. To say Arzavi Mavre. Where did this ceremony take place? It was under the great cedar trees. V'chichazinu. And when the Meraglim saw the Nephilim, and they were out there in the forests and in the fields, Solku Yasu Bilonu. They sat on these trees to try to hide from the Nephilim who were out there in the forests. V'shami deka amre, and the Meraglim overheard the Nephilim speaking one to the other. Kochazin and inchi the damu lekamtze bilone. We saw people hiding in the trees, and they looked like little grasshoppers because in their eyes they were so small. So you can't prove that the Meraglim were liars. The Medrash says that there was a story about one daughter of one of the giants who entered into a field, an orchard, and she started eating a pomegranate. And she took off the peel of the pomegranate and threw it on the ground to eat the seeds inside the pomegranate. You can imagine how gigantic the outside of the pomegranate was. So the Meraglim, who were trying to hide in the paradise, they saw this klipa, and they thought, maybe it's like a cave or something. So they went inside of it, 12 people to hide. She ate up the pomegranate, and then she decided to hide the klipa. She didn't want her father to know that she had eaten this pomegranate. And she took up the klipa and she threw it outside of the orchard. And the Meraglim turned one to the other, and they saw her great strength. Virag vurasa mashahoisa svura sha'anu chagavin. And the reason she threw it is because she thought we were little creatures. The Gemara now says, Vatisa the day that the Meraglim returned from their mission, Erev Tisha B'Av, and that night the people of Israel stayed up crying. God declared, "Hey bachu b'chia shel chinam, v'ani ekva lahem b'chia l'doros." I had told them that it's an Eretz Tova Miod Miod, and they were crying for naught. I will give them good reason to cry over all the generations on that very day of Tisha B'Av, when I will destroy the two Bate Mikdashos, and the people of Israel will be sent into Golus. That would be a Bechia L'Doros. Pasuk says, "Vayomru kol ha'edo lirgom osam ba'avanim." Uksiv ukvod Hashem nir bi'ol moed el kol bnei Yisrael. The Gemara Darshan Zomer Rav Chia bar Ava. Vayomru kol ha'eda ukvod Hashem, one next to the other. Malamed shenatlu, the Eda took avanim, and they threw it up to the Shamayim v'zarkum klape mala. And that's Vayomru kol ha'eda lirgom, and it refers to kvod Hashem. in my books, this is a striking similarity to the Dor HaFloga. And now the Gemara is going to describe in great detail the way that God brought about the punishment, the death of the Meraglim. They died a terrible death. Because it says in the Pasuk, B'magefa. Now, Magefa is usually written with a shva, and here it's written with a pasach. And it comes to teach us that they died in a misa that would be appropriate for them, mida keneged mida, Rav Chanina bar Papa, Darsh Rav Shila ish kfar tamarta, melamid shenishtarbev l'shonam, their tongues hung out, v'nafal tiburim, all the way down to their bellies, to their navels, v'yitoloim yotzim l'shonam, and these kind of bugs, I don't know what word can we use for toloim, I don't know, and they went into their body, entering through the navel, umitiburim nichnasim b'lshonam, and from the tibur they went back up to the lashon, and this is all mida keneged mida because they sinned with their lashon by speaking lashon hara in Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is called Tibura, meaning Emtsa'a Shel Olam, the middle of the entire globe. As Yechezkel says, Yoshvi al Tabur Ha'oret, says the Radak, that Eretz Yisrael is called Tabur Ha'olam, because it's in the middle of the entire globe, and therefore they were punished that their lashon, their tongue, would go out until the Tabur. Rav Nachbar Yitzchak would be Asker Mesu. The punishment for lashon hara is asker, some sort of disease that affects the throat. And now at this point, the Gemara goes back to our discussion on the previous daf, on Daf Lamed Daled, about the avonim that were taken into the Yarden. And we had a whole discussion about what was the weight of the avonim. And from there, we went on to describe the weight of the eshkol, the cluster of grapes that the Meraglim brought. And then we went on to the Parsha of the Meraglim. Now we go back to the Seder of crossing the Yarden. After the waters of the Yarden stood up vertically like poles, and Bnei Yisrael traversed the entire Yarden from the east over to the western side, and they entered into Eretz Yisrael. The Kohanim who were carrying the Aron went back after them to the Tzad Mizrachi Shel Yarden, and Chazru Amayim Limkoman, and then the waters of the Yarden went back to their place. Shenemar Vayihi Kalos HaKohanim Nosei Aron Bris Hashem Mitoch HaYarden. In Yoshua, it describes it, Nitku kapos ragle akonim el acharova, and the feet of the raglim were in the dry land. Yashuvu me'amadim koman, and then the waters came back. Vayelchu kismol shilshom al kol gedosav, and the Jordan River returned to what it was before. Nimtza aron v'nosei akolim mitzad echad. The Yisrael mitzad echad. Then it comes out that the Aron that was being carried by the Kohanim were on one side, they were on the eastern side of the Yarden because they went back, and Yisrael are standing on the western side of the Yarden. They had crossed the Yarden. And then there was a great miracle. How did the Nosei HaAron traverse the Yarden? After all, the waters returned to what it was. Nasa ha'aron es nosav. The Aron actually carried those Kohanim and flew over the Yarden. And they went back to the western side into Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar vayehi kasher tam kol ha'am la'avor vayavor Aron Hashem v'kohanim l'fnei ha'am. So at the beginning, the Kohanim and the Nosei Aaron went down into the Yarden, and the waters were dried up. Afterwards, Klal Yisrael passed over from the eastern side of the Yarden to the western side into Eretz Yisrael, and when they completed, then the waters fell back into the place. The Yarden was back to what it was before. The Kohanim had gone back to the eastern side of the Yarden, and now the Aaron carried the Nosei Aaron through the air and brought them back into Eretz Yisrael to the eastern side, to the western side. It's like a Spielberg movie. The Aldover Zeh, now the entire Jewish people saw that the Kohanim are not carrying the Aron, but rather the Aron is carrying them, is Nenash Uzzah. Now we have the Parsha of Uzzah. And the Parsha of Uzzah is described in two places, in Shmuel Beis and in Divrei Yomim Aleph. In Divrei Yomim Aleph, it records that when David HaMelech brought the Aron back from Kiryas Ye'arim, after the Plishtim had taken capture of the Aron, and David HaMelech had the Aron placed on a wagon, and the wagon was tied down to cattle and being dragged. Vayavo ad Goren Kidon. They came to a place called Goren Kidon. Vayishlach Uzzah yodo lechos es ha'aron. And what happened was somehow the Aron, the Agola, the wagon that was carrying the Aron, got disconnected from the bakar that were schlepping the Aron, and at that point the Aron started slipping off the Agola. So what did Uzzah do? He stretched out his hand, grabbed onto the Aron in order that it shouldn't fall. Amalo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Uzzah, don't you know what happened when the people of Israel crossed the Yarden? The Aron was Nosov Nasa, carried those who carried them. Is Atzmo Lo Kolshkein? Can't the Aron carry itself? You have no justification for being afraid that the Aron would fall. If the Aron can carry the Nosim, certainly the Aron can carry itself. And therefore you had no right, and it wasn't permissible for you to send out your hand, grab onto the Aron in order that it shouldn't fall. And the Metzudas David explains that Uzzah was punished because of miut emunah b'Hashem. He didn't have enough faith in God by fearing that the Aron would fall. And that's why the pasuk says, Al asher sholach yodo. The Radak, on the other hand, explains that his sin, Uzzah, was that he was not a member, a descendant of Shevet Levi, and therefore he wasn't part of Nesias HaAron. And therefore he was not justified in stretching out his hand to catch on to the Aron. Vayicharaf Hashem bi Uzzah. Now we go to Shmuel, and in Sefer Shmuel, God gets angry at Uzzah v'yakeu sham al hashal. What is al hashal? And then the pasuk says vayomas sham. So the Gemara understands that al inyan hashal kibel es onesh misasa. What's shal? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, two opinions about shal. Chan Omar al iske shalu. Shalu is a lashon of shichacha vishgaga, as we find in Shmuel al hashali. And the Metzudas Tzion says on that pasuk that shali is to be translated as shgaga. So in other words, Uzzah did not have a deliberate intention, according to this interpretation, of desecrating the Aron. On the contrary, he made a shgaga, he made a mistake, thinking that the Aron was going to fall when the Aron could carry itself. So he didn't have that Kal V'chomer that we saw that Kosh Baruch Hu mentioned. But Chad Omar, according to another opinion, the word shal indicates that he was guilty, and asa tzracha b'fanav. The word shal means neshira milamal lamata. Right? There's an entire chapter in the end of Beitza, which is called Mashilin. Mashilin means when you throw something down. The Mishnah there talks about sending peros down through an aruba. And here too, it's a metaphor for defecation. He defecated in front of the Aron. I mean, this was a tremendous insult to the Aron. And the Maharsha points out that according to this opinion, you have to say that there was a double chet. First of all, he grabbed onto the Aron, because that's what it says in the Pasuk. And on top of that, he did what he did in front of the Aron. Vayom Hashem im Aron Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was angry at Uzzah, and Vayakev Shem Elokim al Hashal Vayom Hashem im Aron Elokim over Rabbi Yochanan Uzzah ba li olam haba. How do I know that Uzzah has a share in the world to come? Shenemar im Aron Elokim. And that sort of attaches Ula to the Aron. Ma Aron li olam kayam. And what does that mean, li olam kayam? Again, back to Spielberg. Yeshayahu Hanavi hid the Aron, the lost ark. Af Uzzah ba li olam haba. Now the Maharsha is a little bothered by this, because, like, what's the Hava Mina here? That Uzzah should lose his share in Olam Haba just because he didn't learn this Kal V'chomer that the Aron could carry itself. Therefore, what? There's a Havmina that he should forfeit his portion in the world to come. And the Kli Yakar gives an answer. The Chiddush is that immediately after Uzzah's hand came in direct contact with the Aron, Nisdabek bi Aron, he couldn't pull his hand off the Aron. It got attached to the Aron. V'nifreda nafsho migufa, and immediately his soul departed from his body and entered into Olam Haba immediately. And there was no process of decomposition of the body, which normally is a cathartic experience that prepares someone for Olam Haba. He went directly into Olam Haba. And that reflects the opinion that he did not learn the Kal V'chomer, he was a shogeg. This seemed like a punishment to David, that Uzzah would die and be killed by Hashem. Omer Abu Lozar, Shenishtanu panav kicharora. The face of David turned black, like a charora. Charora, you remember, is a cookie that they used to put onto the coals. Elamei ata. So the Gemara asks, Kol heicha dechsiv vayichar hachi nami. You tell me that the word vayichar means that it turns black? The face, the countenance turns black. Well, the word vayichar appears describing Hashem. So you're going to tell me that God's countenance turned colors? That doesn't make any sense. And where it says Hasam, wherever it says regarding Hashem vayichar siv af, the word af always appears together with the word vayichar. And that's a lashon of kas, vayichar af. Hacha, but with regard to David, lo ksiv vayichar af. It only says vayichar. And with vayichar alone, it means that his face blackened. Dorash Rav Neiman Enesh David. Why was David guilty that as a result of this whole story where David is taking the Aron back in the Agola, Uzzah dies? Again, even though Uzzah died because he sent his hands out to grab the Aron or because he's Asa Tzrachov, but nevertheless, the very fact that he was there at the time in the Siyas Aron Lishalayim when it was a Simcha Gedola, it must have been that if there wasn't some sort of chait of David, God wouldn't have killed Uzzah immediately, because God wouldn't want to be mevatel that great simcha of returning the Aron to Yerushalayim. It must have been that David was somehow even inappropriate. So the Gemara, Rava is actually seeking out some sort of inappropriate behavior on the part of David. Neshakara l'divrei Torah zmiros shenemar zmiros hoyu lichukecha bebeis megurai. And David HaMelech is here comparing Divrei Torah to Zmiros. And this is when he ran away from his enemies and he was in tremendous fear, and he was able to think about Torah, the Chukei Torah, and that brought him into a state of happiness. And he compares that to Zmiros. B'mkoma shayisi gola umisnodim hem tachas eitzavot shoyeli merashoyim bezokri chukecha hoyuli zmiros vayisi mishtashea b'hem. It's a Radak. Omer LaKadosh Baruch Hu al Divrei Torah. You are talking about Divrei Torah comparing to the Zmiros? I mean, Zmiros is something that, you sing it for a second and then you forget about it. But Divrei Torah, the Pasuk of Mishlei describes him as Hata'if einecha bo veinenu, that if a person would close his eyes and be Meseach Das from Divrei Torah without perpetually, continually thinking about them and be mistakel by him, they forgot. That's how serious Torah is. No Hesech Hadas. Atakori osam Smiros, and then you call them songs? Hareini machshilcha, I'm going to cause you to make an error. The Torah says that you carry the Aron on your shoulders. And that was the work of the Bnei Kas of the Leviim. It says in the parasha of Karbonos Anasim Bamidbar Zayin, Ulivnei Kas lo nosan ki avodas hakodesh aleim bakotef yisod. And Moshe Rabbeinu put the agolos of the Leviim on the kotef when they carried, in other words, all of the other branches of Shevet Levi who were in charge of carrying and transporting the Mishkan and Caleb, they put it in agolos. But Bnei Kas, who carried the Aron and the Shulchan, that wasn't allowed to be put in agolos. They had to carry it on their kotef. The Iu, I say agolos, and David brings an agola to carry the Aron and transport it on wagons? What a mistake. The Pasuk says in Shmuel, Vayach bi'anshe beis shemesh ki ro bi'aron Hashem. So we're talking now about the bringing of the Aron from the Plishtim, and the Pasuk says ki ro. So what is ki ro? They saw mishum de ro vayach Elokim. They saw the Aron. They looked at it when it came to Beit Shemesh, right? When we redeemed the Aron from captivity with the Plishtim, it came to Beit Shemesh. And here we have Machlokas, Rabbi Avov, Rabbi Elazar. Not according to one opinion, what was their sin? It says in the Pasuk of Beit Shemesh, Kotzrim Ktsir Chite, Ba'emek. They were busy harvesting their wheat down in the valley. Vayisru seineim vayirus ha'aron. Vayismechu liros. They were happy to see the Aron, but nevertheless, they weren't mevatel malachtam. They didn't stop from the ktsira. They continued harvesting instead of being mechabed by stopping. And that's the sin, that even though they bowed in a simcha, but nevertheless they continued their ktsira, and they were punished in the Magefa. V'chad Omer, according to another meaning, Mile nami omor. There were words that came out of their mouth in front of the Aron that were inappropriate.